The sun was hot above the alien capital, its light bouncing off towers made of gold-like stone. John Walker stood in the middle of the vast courtyard, surrounded by guards in shining armor. He had been brought here as a prisoner, but today, the air felt different. The Queen herself had come. Her tall figure moved through the line of soldiers, every step heavy with power. Her golden crown caught the sunlight, making her look almost unreal. In her hand was a book, not just any book. His book, it was his diary. The one he kept hidden under his sleeping mat in the human quarter. He had written in it almost every night, using it as his only way to let his thoughts breathe. His words were not meant for anyone's eyes, especially not hers, but now the Queen's cold gaze was fixed on him. Her fingers traced the cover like it was a sacred object. He felt his chest tighten as she opened it. The courtyard went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. She read the first page, and her lips moved slightly as her eyes scanned his writing. John knew what was in there. His private thoughts about the alien court, his anger at their rules, his descriptions of the Queen herself, things he had no right to put into words. Heat rushed to his face. He could already see the soldiers, hands resting on their weapons, waiting for her order. "You wrote this?" Her voice cut the air like a blade. She did not shout. She didn't need to. The tone alone carried a weight that made the guards straighten and the crowd draw back. John's mouth went dry. He could lie, he could deny it. But he also knew she could have it checked in seconds. The diary was written in human script, and every word was his own style. Still, admitting it would be like stepping into the fire himself. "I did." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. A murmur ran through the onlookers. The Queen's eyes narrowed, not with rage, but with something else, curiosity. She turned another page, her braids sliding over her armor as she tilted her head. The sunlight hit her pale hair, making her seem almost carved from light and gold. "You speak of my people as cruel, yet you also write of our honor," she said. "You call me dangerous, yet you also call me beautiful." Her eyes locked on his. Why? John had no answer that could save him. His words had been written late at night, when he thought no one could hear. They were raw, messy, and human. He had described her the way he saw her, not just as a ruler, but as a woman whose presence was like a storm. The silence stretched, and the weight of the moment pressed on his shoulders. He could feel every soldier watching, waiting to see if his next breath would be his last. The Queen closed the diary slowly, as though the act itself carried meaning. She stepped closer until he could see every detail in her golden armor, the fine engravings of ancient symbols, the shimmer of the fabric beneath. Her voice was lower now, almost quiet, but it still carried across the courtyard. "In your world, do you often write truths that could cost you your life?" she asked. Her gaze did not leave his face. She wanted an answer, but more than that. She wanted to see if he would tremble. John lifted his head. "Yes," he said, "because if the truth is not written, it is lost." Something shifted in her expression, a flicker too quick to name. She stepped back, turning to her guards. The moment held like a drawn bow. He had no idea if he had just saved himself or sealed his fate. The Queen did not order his execution. She turned her back to him and began walking toward the steps of the Great Hall. The guards followed her, but two stayed behind and grabbed John by the arms. Their grip was like steel. They marched him after her, through the towering gates and into a hall that felt like the inside of a sunlit temple. Gold and white stone stretched in every direction, carved with images of battles and rulers long past. Inside, the air was cooler. But the weight of the moment pressed harder on him. The Queen climbed a set of wide stairs and sat upon a throne shaped like a sunburst. She placed the diary on a small table beside her. The way she rested her fingers on it told John she was not finished with him yet. Her eyes never left him as the guards forced him to his knees on the polished floor. "You speak as though you know my world," she said, her voice echoing against the stone. "Yet you have been here only months. Tell me, human, what gives you the right to write of us as if your words are judgment?" Her gaze was sharp, but there was no anger in it. She was testing him, pulling at the threads of his mind. He felt every second like a blade hovering over his skin. John's thoughts raced. He could stay silent, but that would make him look weak. He could flatter her, but false sweetness would be easy to spot. "Because I see things your own people no longer notice," he said finally. "You live inside your power. You forget how it looks to those outside it." The hall went quiet. Even the guards seemed to be holding their breath. The queen's lips curved slightly, though it was not quite a smile. "Interesting," she said, leaning back in her throne. "Then perhaps your diary is more valuable than I thought. But there are things here you will explain to me." She picked up the book and opened to a page halfway through. "You wrote that my rule is like a golden cage. Explain this, human." Her eyes pinned him where he knelt. He could almost feel the weight of her attention on his skin like heat. John's heart pounded, but he met her gaze. "Because your people admire you, but they also fear you. They stay inside the lines you draw, even if they dream of something beyond. It is beautiful here, but no one dares to change it. That is the cage." His words were steady, but inside he was bracing for the blow that might follow. The queen studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally she closed. "The diary again. You speak with the tongue of someone who has seen too much," she said. "Perhaps that is why your world was always at war." She rose from her throne, walking slowly down the steps until she stood only a breath away from him. "But tell me, John Walker, if you could change my world, would you?" Her voice was quiet, yet it carried a challenge sharp enough to cut. John swallowed. "If it meant freedom for your people, yes," he said. The words were out before he could stop them. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, but this time there was something else in them. Not anger. Not even surprise. It was closer to intrigue, like she had just found a piece of a puzzle she had been searching for. She turned away, signaling for the guards to lift him. "Then you will serve me," she said. "Not as a slave, not as a guest. You will serve. As an observer. You will watch, you will write, and you will speak to me of what you see. But if you lie, your life will end before your next word." The command struck him harder than any chain could. She had just bound him to her world in a way he could never escape. John was led from the throne room into a long hallway lined with tall windows. Outside, he could see the alien city spreading in all directions, glittering under the sun. The guards walked in silence, their armor clicking softly with each step. He noticed how the streets were full of people, yet every head turned away when the queen's guards passed. It was respect, but it was also fear. They took him to a chamber high in one of the palace towers. It was not a cell, but it was not free space either. The walls were made of polished white stone, and the windows were covered by a lattice of gold. A desk stood in the center, already holding parchment and ink. The guards left without a word, the heavy door locking behind them. John understood his task without needing it explained. He was here to watch, to write, and to be watched himself. He walked to the window and looked down at the city again. From up here, the streets looked peaceful, almost perfect. But he remembered the faces he had seen during his months here. Merchants who smiled too quickly. Children who stopped laughing when soldiers walked by. There was beauty, yes, but there was a silence that went deeper than sound. This was the golden cage he had written about. A knock at the door drew his attention. The door opened, and a young alien woman entered carrying a tray of food. She was dressed in simple robes, her eyes downcast. She placed the tray on the desk without meeting his gaze. "What's your name?" John asked, but she only shook her head and backed away. The door closed again, and the lock clicked. He sat down, realizing how alone he was despite the walls. Not being bars, that night he could not sleep. The city lights below shimmered like stars trapped in stone. He thought of the queen's words. She had not punished him, but she had not freed him either. She wanted his truth, yet that truth could kill him. Every word he wrote from now on would be a weapon, and he would not know until later if it was aimed at her enemies or at himself. The next morning, 2 guards arrived to escort him. They took him through the city, past market stalls and fountains, past streets lined with statues of past rulers. People bowed as the queen passed in her own carriage, but the bows were shallow and quick. She saw everything from her seat, her eyes sharp even when she did not turn her head. John walked close enough to hear the faint creak of the carriage wheels over the stone roads. They stopped at a grand courtyard where a group of advisors waited. The queen stepped out, her armor catching the morning sun. She began speaking with her advisors in their own language, but every now and then her gaze flicked toward John. He knew she wanted him to see this gathering. She was showing him the core of her rule, the decisions, the debates, the careful weighing of power. Yet even here, no one dared to raise their voice above hers. When the meeting ended, the queen approached him. "What did you see?" she asked. He chose his words carefully. "I saw loyalty," he said. "And I saw fear." She studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Write it," she said, "every word. Do not change it for my sake." Her command was clear, but so was the danger. She was giving him the rope, and it was up to him whether it became a bridge or a noose. Back in his chamber, he dipped the quill into the ink and began writing. The words came slowly at first, but then they began to flow. He wrote about the market, the meeting, the queen's presence. He wrote about the beauty of the city and the shadows that followed every golden light. When he stopped, his hand ached and the ink had stained his fingers. He read over his work, wondering which lines would bring questions and which might bring chains. Asterisk. The next day began with the sound of the lock turning on John's chamber door. 2 guards stepped in, their armor gleaming in the early sunlight. One motioned for him to follow without speaking. John rose from his desk and walked between them, his steps echoing softly in the stone corridor. Outside, the palace was alive with movement. Courtiers hurried along the walkways, their robes sweeping over the marble floors. The air smelled faintly of flowers from the gardens below. They led him through a set of wide doors into a vast library, unlike anything he had ever seen. Shelves rose higher than 3 men stacked on top of one another, each filled with scrolls and books bound in fine materials. Golden light streamed through high windows, catching dust motes that floated like tiny sparks. The queen was already there, seated at a long table. Before her lay his diary, a fresh stack of parchment, and an ink set finer than the one in his chamber. "You will work here today," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "I will be nearby, reading your words as you write them." Her voice was calm, but John could sense the tension beneath it. He sat down, his pulse steadying only slightly. The quill in his hand felt heavier under her watchful gaze. Every scratch on the parchment seemed loud in the silence of the library. Hours passed as he wrote. She read silently, her eyes moving. With quiet precision over each line he finished. Sometimes her brow furrowed slightly, and at other times her lips pressed together in thought. Not once did she interrupt him. The weight of her presence kept his sentences sharp and his descriptions exact. He wrote about the people in the streets, the way their eyes shifted when they saw soldiers, the pride in the city's architecture, and the unspoken rules that bound them. When he finally set down the quill, she placed her hand on the parchment. "You see more than most of my own advisors," she said. "But you also speak of dangers they will not name." Her gaze locked with his, unblinking. "Tell me, John, do you think my rule will last?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. He felt the danger in answering, But he also knew silence would be worse. "It will last as long as your people believe it serves them," he said. "If they begin to see it as serving only you, they will find a way to end it." The words left him steady, but his heart beat faster in his chest. Her expression did not change, yet something in the air shifted. She leaned back, resting her arms on the carved arms of her chair, her eyes never leaving his. "You speak as though you know rebellion," she said. He did not look away. "I have seen it," he replied. "And I have seen what happens when leaders forget the ground they stand on." For a moment, silence filled the library, heavy and complete. Then the queen stood, walking slowly to the nearest shelf and pulling out a large book bound in black leather. She set it on the table before him. "This," she said, "is the history of our first uprising. It was crushed, but its lessons remain. You will read it. Then you will tell me if you see any signs of it returning." Her voice carried authority, but there was also an edge of curiosity in it. She wanted his judgment, and that meant she valued it more than she would admit openly. John nodded, feeling the weight of the task settle on him. She left the library, the soft sound of her armor fading into the halls. John opened the book, the pages filled with accounts of speeches, riots, and bloody battles. He read of how the first queen after the founding had faced the same question, whether the people's loyalty was real or forced. The answers were written in the rise and fall of cities, in the loyalty of soldiers, and in the eyes of those who dared to dream of change. John spent the rest of the day reading the book the queen had given him. The accounts were detailed, each page telling of leaders who believed themselves unshakable. Yet the cracks had formed not from outside enemies, but from within their own people. Small protests had grown into movements, and movements had turned into revolts. It was not the strength of armies that had decided their fate, but the strength of belief in those they ruled. By the time the light from the windows turned golden, he had finished half the book. His mind was heavy with images of crowded streets, speeches shouted from balconies, and soldiers torn between loyalty and truth. He could see patterns, small signs that repeated through history. If those signs were here now, the queen's reign was not as secure as she thought. That thought pressed against him like an unwelcome shadow. The door opened, and the queen entered without the guards. She moved quietly, her steps making no sound on the polished floor. "You have read enough for today," she said. "Tell me what you have learned." John closed the book and looked at her, the black leather cover still warm from his hands. "I learned that no empire falls quickly. It begins in whispers and ends in fire," he said. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes sharpened. She walked closer, resting one hand on the table between them. "And do you hear whispers in my streets?" The question was direct, her tone steady. He could lie and win her favor for now, but he knew she wanted truth, even if it was dangerous. "Yes," he said. "They are small, but they are there. Your people respect you, but some fear the walls around them. Fear can be loyalty's enemy." She studied him in silence before speaking again. "Then you will find these whispers," she said. "You will see who speaks them and why. I will know if they are seeds or weeds." Her voice left no room for refusal. John nodded slowly, aware that she was now sending him into the heart of the city, into places where his presence as a human would draw attention. This was not just observation anymore. This was stepping into the undercurrent. The next morning, he was escorted beyond the palace gates. The streets outside were louder, the air thick with the smell of cooked food and market spices. Stalls lined both sides of the road, selling everything from fine fabrics to metalwork. The guards kept a careful distance, giving him the space to move and listen, yet their eyes never left him. Every word he heard seemed to carry more weight now that he knew what he was looking for. He stopped at a stall where an older alien man sold carved wooden figures. The man greeted him politely, but his eyes flicked toward the guards before he spoke. "You're the human from the palace," the man said softly. "Tell me, is the queen as they say?" John pretended not to understand. "What do they say?" The man glanced around before replying. "That she rules with strength, but strength is not kindness." The words were careful, but their meaning was clear. John bought one of the carvings and moved on, letting the guards think nothing of the exchange. He passed through a crowded square where street performers played music on strange, curved instruments. Children laughed, but he saw how quickly their parents pulled them closer when soldiers passed by. The sound of the music was bright, yet it seemed to cover something heavier underneath. He wrote the moment into his mind, knowing it would go into his pages later. By the time he returned to the palace, the queen was waiting in the same library. "And?" she asked. John placed the carving on the table. "They love their city," he said. "But they wonder if their queen loves them back." The queen's gaze rested on the carving for a long moment before she lifted it in her hand. "Then we will see what truth there is in that," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were unreadable. John was called to the queen's private chamber the following morning. It was a room unlike any other in the palace. The walls were draped with heavy red curtains, and the floor was covered in rugs so soft his boots sank into them. A fire burned in a stone hearth, giving the air a faint scent of cedar. The queen stood near the window, her gaze fixed on the city beyond. She did not turn to greet him at once. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. "I have read your latest writings," she said. "You do not flatter me, yet you do not insult me either. You write as if you are carving truth from stone." She turned to face him, her braid falling over one shoulder. "But truth is dangerous when written in ink. Ink can be read by anyone." Her meaning was clear, and John felt the weight of her words press against him. "I write for you," he said, "not for them." The queen stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "And yet," she replied, "if your words were to leave these walls, they could be used to wound me. I must know I can trust you." Her tone was not a question. It was a demand. John nodded once, understanding that her trust was both a gift and a test. She moved to a small table and picked up the wooden carving he had brought from the market. "This," she said, "was made by a man who remembers the old ways. Such people can be seeds of unrest. Tell me his name." John hesitated. Giving the name would mark the man for the queen's attention, and perhaps her judgment. "I do not know it," he said finally. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, but she placed the carving back on the table without another word. "Tomorrow you will walk the lower districts," she said. "You will see them as they live. No guards will follow you, but do not mistake this for freedom. You will be watched." The thought of moving through the city alone was both tempting and dangerous. Without the guards, he could speak more openly with people. But without the guards, there was also no shield between him and anyone who might see him as an enemy. The next morning, he stepped into the streets wearing plain clothing provided by the palace. The fabric was rougher than what he was used to, but it allowed him to blend with the crowd. The lower districts were alive with sound and color. Merchants shouted prices, children darted between market stalls, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from open doorways. Yet beneath it all, John sensed a quiet watchfulness. People noticed each other here in a way they did not in the upper city. He stopped at a bakery, buying a small loaf from a young woman with flour on her hands. "You're not from here," she said with a faint smile. "No," John replied. "I'm visiting." Her eyes flicked over him, and she leaned closer. "Then be careful where you ask questions. Some people don't like strangers knowing too much." Her warning was soft, but it stayed with him as he moved on. By midday, he had spoken to a handful of shopkeepers and workers. Most were polite but guarded. A few spoke more freely, mentioning the high taxes or the strict patrols at night. None dared to raise their voice, even in the bustle of the market. John made mental notes of every face, every word, knowing the queen would ask for them later. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the streets, and he turned toward the palace. When he returned, the queen was waiting in the library. She closed the book she had been reading and gestured for him to speak. "What did you see?" she asked. "I saw a city that works hard to look whole," he said. "But under the surface there are cracks." She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once, as if confirming something she had already suspected. The queen dismissed the servants from the library so that only she and John remained. The tall shelves of books rose around them like silent witnesses. A single beam of sunlight fell across the table, lighting the parchment where he had written his latest notes. She reached for them without asking, her fingers moving over the pages slowly. She read in silence, and the air between them grew heavier with every second. When she finished, she placed the papers down and studied him. "You write as if you are both outside my world and deep within it," she said. "You see what others do not, and yet you choose your words carefully. This balance is rare. But now I will ask you to do something where balance will not be possible." Her eyes locked onto his, and he knew whatever came next would change. His position in her court. "There is a gathering tonight in the lower districts," she continued. "It is said they meet to speak of changes they want in the way I rule. You will go there. You will listen. And you will tell me every word they speak." The task was dangerous in ways that went beyond the open streets. A meeting of this kind would not welcome strangers, especially not humans. Still, he nodded once, understanding that refusal was not an option. That night, he walked the narrow streets lit by dim lanterns and the glow from shuttered windows. The lower districts felt different in the dark. Laughter was softer here, and footsteps quickened at the sound of approaching strangers. He followed the directions given to him by a merchant earlier in the day, turning down an alley that smelled faintly of smoke and metal. At its end, a door stood half open with light spilling out. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning oil and the quiet murmur of voices. A dozen figures sat in a circle, their faces half hidden by the shadows. They spoke in low tones, and John caught fragments of their words: taxes too high, soldiers too harsh, a queen too distant. These were not the shouts of rebels, but the careful words of people who feared being overheard. He stood near the back, listening and memorizing every phrase. A man with sharp eyes noticed him and walked over. "I have not seen you here before," the man said. John kept his tone even. "I am only passing through. I came to hear the truth of the city." The man's expression tightened, but he said nothing more, returning to his seat. John stayed until the meeting broke apart, the people leaving in ones and twos, each disappearing quickly into the night. When he stepped outside, the air felt colder. He walked back toward the palace, replaying the voices in his mind. None had called for open defiance, but all had spoken of a desire for change. It was a quiet unrest, but one that could grow if left untouched. He knew the queen would see it as both a threat and an opportunity, depending on how it was handled. She was waiting for him when he returned. The fire in her chamber burned low, casting a warm glow across her armor. "Tell me," she said. He repeated what he had heard, giving her each detail in the order he remembered it. She listened without interruption, her hands resting lightly on the arms of her chair. When he finished, she rose and walked toward the window, looking out at the sleeping city. "They want to be heard," she said. "And they will be. But it will be my voice they hear, not theirs. You have done what I asked. Now you will help me decide how to answer them." Her tone left no question that his role was changing again. He was no longer only the observer. He was becoming part of the decisions that could shape the future of her reign. **. The queen summoned her advisors to the great hall the following morning. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting long beams across the polished floor. John stood to one side, his notes in hand, as the council gathered around the throne. The Queen's presence was like a drawn blade, sharp and commanding. She waited until every voice in the hall had gone silent before speaking. "There is unrest in my city," she said. "It is quiet now, but quiet unrest can grow louder if ignored. We will not silence them with force. We will answer them." Her words caused a ripple among the advisors. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others exchanged quick glances. John could see they were not used to hearing her speak in such terms. She was showing them a side they had not expected. She gestured for John to step forward. "This human has seen what many of you have not," she continued. "He has walked the streets, listened to the people, and returned with their truth. Today, he will share it." John's pulse quickened, but he stepped into the center of the hall. His voice was steady as he spoke of the meetings, the markets, and the words spoken in guarded tones by merchants and workers. When he finished, the hall was silent. The Queen rose from her throne and moved toward him. "You have done what I asked," she said. "And now you will stand beside me when I speak to the people." Her command was not a request. John bowed his head slightly, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This was no longer a role he could step away from. He was now part of the image she wished to present. That afternoon, the Queen and her retinue walked to the largest square in the city. The space was filled with citizens, drawn by the news that their ruler would speak. Soldiers kept order at the edges, but the Queen's voice carried over them, strong and clear. She spoke of the people's concerns, of the changes she intended to make, and of the value she placed on their loyalty. Then, she did something unexpected. She introduced John to them. "This human has written of our world," she said. "He has not spared me from his truths, and for that I honor him. He has shown me what my eyes have missed." The crowd murmured, some with surprise, others with interest. John stood still, meeting the gaze of those in front. He could see curiosity in their faces, and perhaps even a flicker of hope. In that moment, he realized she was using him as proof that she could listen. When the speech ended, the Queen returned to the palace with John walking beside her. Inside the safety of the great hall, she dismissed her retinue and turned to him. "You have served me well," she said. "And you have done it without bending your words to please me. That is rare, and I will keep it close." Her tone was softer now, yet still carried the edge of command. He understood that his position was secure. For now, in the days that followed, John continued to write. His diary was no longer a secret hidden under his bed, but a record kept openly in the palace library. The Queen read it often, sometimes questioning him about certain passages, sometimes leaving her own notes in the margins. What had begun as a danger had become a bond, one built on the fragile balance between truth and power. One evening, as the sun set over the golden towers, the Queen joined him in the library. She placed a fresh journal on the table before him. "For your next words," she said, "write them as if the future depends on them, because it might." Her eyes held his for a long moment before she turned and walked away, leaving him with the weight of her trust and the knowledge that his pen could shape more than just pages.